Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim, and we're going to cover the Missouri versus Texas A&M game, and we're going to specifically talk about the draftable players for the 2025 draft that are playing against each other in this game. So let's start right at the top. There's a first-round pick grade on one player from each team. And we want to start talking about Luther Burden, the wide receiver from Missouri, and Nick Scourton, the edge from Texas A&M. So ask yourself, which of those two players would you take higher? I am the type of person where I believe you build a team from the defensive line and the defense. Once you have a quarterback, you build the defense and specifically an edge rusher before you would take a wide receiver. But I think most fans, as well as most draft boards, will have Luther Burden higher than Nick Scourton. But that's a reasonable question to ask yourself as you're coming out of this game, is which of those players would you take higher? And feel free to drop in the comments on YouTube which of those players you think you would take higher. And if we look just a little bit further down the draft board, Luther Burden is going to be matched up against a couple of corners from Texas A&M that have draftable grades. So the first corner would be Will Lee, 6'2", 185, cornerback from Texas A&M. And a little bit further down the board would be Tyreek Chappell, corner from Texas A&M, 5'10", 185. Okay, so a couple things also about Tyreek Chappell. I also have some special teams notes. So he has multiple blocked punts. So that's a fun fact about Tyreek Chappell. As you might be looking for let's say a day 3 corner that can give you some special teams snaps to help make the 53-man roster for your favorite NFL team. But in this game, he'll be on the field as a corner, and he'll be matched up in some cases against Luther Burden, who some people are saying is the best player in the country. So ask yourself, how do the corners from Texas A&M match up against Burden? And are they showing that they should be drafted? Or are they showing you they're just a guy on the field? That would be a legitimate question I would ask myself about the Texas A&M corners coming out of this game. Is, do I want them on my team? Did they compete against one of the best players in the country, in Luther Burden? A little bit further down the board, we have Shamar Turner, defensive lineman from Texas A&M. And Turner, 6'3", 290. So he's a 3 technique. He might even be a 5 technique. So if your team is a 3-4 defense, that's a reasonable defensive end to have. And you hear me on other podcasts talk about 3 technique versus 1 technique. This draft is going to have a lot of 3 technique defensive linemen, especially looking at like a day 2, round 2 type grade. Okay. And Turner's right in the middle of that conversation. He's in the top 90 players on the board that I'm looking at. So he's definitely right in the middle of that day 2. Do you take him in round 2? Do you take him in round 3 situation? And a little bit further down the list, Missouri has some other players to look at, which would include offensive tackle Marcus Bryant, 6'7", 315, and he can play left tackle. So he's definitely further down the board. But if we see Marcus Bryant from Missouri either matched up against a Nick Scourton or a Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, who are going to be drafted relatively high, ask ourselves, do we like enough from Bryant that we would draft him in round 6 or 7? So that's a reasonable question to ask. There's plenty of other players in this game, so let's start talking about them. Wide receiver on the other side of the ball for Texas A&M, Moose Muhammad III, 6'1", 195, and he returns kicks. So definitely something to look for Moose Muhammad. There's another wide receiver for Texas A&M, Noah Thomas, 6'5", 200. So how many 6'5" wide receivers do we see? So that's definitely something I would look at for Noah Thomas is with that height, does he look comfortable running routes? Is he doing more than just being a big receiver on the field? Is he actually playing receiver, running routes, gaining separation, catching the balls that are thrown his way? And let's talk about the person that is throwing Muhammad and Thomas the ball, and that's quarterback Connor Weigman. So the last time this podcast covered Texas A&M was for the Notre Dame game, and that was not Weigman's best game, right? What I saw in that game, though, was Weigman didn't give up. So his team wasn't playing well against Notre Dame, but that Notre Dame team might have one of the 5 or 10 best defenses in the country this year, right? So what I like when I'm watching a quarterback is I'll learn more about my quarterback when they're 2 or 3 scores down than I will in a blowout win, right? Because when my team is losing, I want to see, is my quarterback leading the team? So is Weigman leading the team? And I thought in the Notre Dame game, that was Weigman. I thought he didn't give up. He was pressing, trying to lead his team. So I like Weigman. I have a day 2 grade on Weigman. I would have no issue, even if, like, for example, you can see I'm wearing a Bills shirt. I would have no issue if Buffalo drafted Weigman in round 2 or round 3 to be their quarterback 2. I would definitely prefer Weigman over Trubisky, for example. But that's just me, right? That doesn't mean that I'm speaking for Bills fans worldwide. So I like Weigman. He's thrown to Moose Muhammad, Noah Thomas. So let's keep our eye on Weigman, Muhammad, Thomas for Texas A&M. A little bit further down the board, we have 2 offensive tackles for Texas A&M, Trey Zune and Ruben Fathertree. Okay, so Zune, left tackle, 6'6", 315. Fatheree, 6'7", 325. Okay, I have them both as redshirt juniors. But ask ourselves, as we're watching the Texas A&M tackles, would we draft them? Right? And then we're definitely talking a day 3 grade, but you're looking at the tackles saying, are they moving well? Are they doing their pass sets effectively? Ask yourself that about the Texas A&M offensive tackles. We also have a couple of safeties for Texas A&M. So we've already mentioned the corners matching up against Luther Burden. You're probably going to hear a couple of other names, which would include safety Bryce Anderson and safety Jacoby Matthews from Texas A&M. Bryce Anderson, safety, Texas A&M, 5'11", 195. Jacoby Matthews, 6'1", 215. So more than likely, Burden's going to be drawing at minimum double coverage, right? So how do Anderson and Matthews fare against Burden and helping bracket him, double cover him? With Anderson and Matthews, I have them on the outside of a draftable grade. But at the same time, there's going to be at least 60 players ahead of them on the draft board that decide to go back to school, which would then put Bryce Anderson and Jacoby Matthews with draftable grades, right? So if you take the go back to school curve, Anderson and Matthews are going to get drafted. So ask yourselves, how high would I draft them? Okay. This is the Mrs. R Relevant podcast, and we are sponsored by NFLDraftFanatics.com. NFLDraftFanatics.com is the only interactive mock draft simulator which gives fans control of the big board and fans control of the player rankings. So the way the simulator works is the players you pick will move up the board. The players you don't pick move down the board. And the more mock drafts you do, and the more mock drafts that are done, the more the boards move. So we appreciate the sponsorship from NFLDraftFanatics.com. It gives us the opportunity to do podcasts like this. My name is Jim. You can find me on Twitter at NFLDraftFanatic. There's no I in fanatic on my Twitter. Okay. We appreciate you watching the Mrs. Are Relevant podcast. Please like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube. Feel free to drop comments in on any of the players here. There's going to be at least 10 players in the Texas A&M Missouri game that are going to be drafted. So this is definitely a good game to watch if you're trying to brush up on some names ahead of the draft in April. And remember, every day is draft day if you have the right attitude. My name is Jim. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have